You are now listening to Protecting Your Nest with board-certified family medicine and obesity medicine specialist Dr. Tony Hampton. For more, visit drtonyhampton.com. Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. The story of our lives is one that is a reflection of our life experiences. Sometimes our life experiences are the result of our intentional actions. For example, your decision to listen to this episode of the podcast was an intentional choice. But sometimes our decisions are influenced by our environment or even a chance meeting or conversation. That conversation could lead to you meeting your life partner or someone encouraging you to do something you've never considered. Now imagine you've had the life experience of trauma, drug addiction, or even suffering from anxiety or depression. But unfortunately, none of your previous life experiences have prepared you to deal with these events or emotional conditions. Maybe, just maybe, you have not been given the tools to be successful. My hope is that some of you or someone you love will learn from today's guest a perspective that will shed some light or even a ray of sunshine so that hope can be restored so that you can overcome many of the struggles that may be facing you from the past or today. Today, with the help of our guests, we will touch on multiple aspects of my Nest and Rope acronym. We will talk about overcoming trauma, reflect on how we think and our emotions, and of course, on our life experiences and how they may be helping or harming us. Today's guest is Jason Shiers. Jason is the host of the Misunderstandings of the Mind podcast. He is also a certified transformative coach and psychotherapist with expertise in addictions and, of course, mental health. He has been working in this field for over 25 years and will share how he overcame his personal struggles and how he now uses his knowledge and experience to help others in his groundbreaking approach to mental health and addiction. And with that, Jason, of course, I'm excited to have you to talk about this important topic on the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I like it to be fresh, and just see. Sometimes we talk about some random abstract stuff, that seems relevant, and sometimes it's kind of like, my own life story is quite intense and long and arduous. It's kind of, there's so many facets of it. It's kind of like so. I mean, like, I'm happy to see what shows up and what, to see what we're going to talk about and what might be always, like you said, always in the hope that one person could hear something that might be life-changing,
That's what it's all about. I hear stories from friends and family, and literally it's like, I remember that, like, I have a neighbor who moved a block away, but he used to live right next to me. And he went to class with a friend in college who was in the paper industry, right? And his friend said, come to class, check it out. The professor then asked him when he went to this class, had you considered the paper industry? And the professor was like, it's not a lot of people in the paper industry. So now this guy leads some huge manufacturing paper company just by a chance meeting, just because he just happened to go to class with his friends. So that's how life is. Sometimes you'll meet your life partner, and sometimes, but again, I hope our chance meeting will inspire somebody as well. And I know we're not on the same side of the world, so maybe we can start our conversation by you sharing with my audience where you live, and maybe to have a little fun. Just give me, one thing you really love about your country or the hometown that you live
in. One thing I love about the town I live in is the road out of here. That's what I love. Yeah,
you're funny.
I'm in the UK. I'm in a I don't know. It's actually a city called Warrington. That is in between Manchester and Liverpool, kind of halfway in between Manchester and Liverpool in the northwest, But yeah, it's just where I live. It's because it's near my children, that's kind of like the love of my life, and that's kind of what's important to me,
Yeah, that's understood. I definitely have two kids too. They're a little older now. They're 23 and 25. But yeah, you fall in love with these little creatures, even though it's a lot of work when they first show up.
Yeah,
But you fall in love. Maybe a little work even later. But
yeah,
But yeah, I appreciate that, and I just think it's important people get a feel for where you're at, and I think I know your story is pretty complex. um, but man, we just got to let them know a little bit about where you've come from. So you've been
yeah,
in some very places, and I know it's got to be hard to talk about this. And I'm sure you've done that many times because you have a wonderful podcast as well. I had a
yeah.
chance to check. You go deep, man, with mental health. So let's talk a little bit. Let's give the audience a little flavor of why I wanted to talk to you. What was your experience like when you were at that lowest point?
Yeah, I mean, like there was multiple lowest points, but I think everything relates back to the moment of tragedy. Like when my dad was killed when I was 5, and like I have this really strong, vivid memory of the police showing up at the door and like what happened in that on that day. And it was like almost like once that happened, it's kind of like I mean, like there are multiple stories, but there's food. Um, which I know you mentioned, it's kind of like was a big thing for me. It was a big part, and from as a man, in my world, in my lifetime, I find that men struggle to talk about the food addiction stuff. It's quite often more a female thing, So as a man, I'm quite openly vocal about the fact that food became my friend. It became my lover, my consistent partner, my reliable internal coping mechanism with that grief, with that, because no one else talked about it. No one knew what to do. Everyone, including my mum, was struggling and doing her best, with everything. So, and back then when that happened, which was 1977, there was no real information. There was no real place to go to. If you wanted help, you went to the psychiatric services because that's all there really was. The counseling professions they were around, but it was more psychoanalysis. It's kind of like rather than counseling and CBT and all that stuff hadn't really sort of turned into a thing yet. So um, after a few years of that kind of ballooning in weight, behaviorally outrageous child that no one could cope with, it's kind of like that in my mind. All I remember is being excited about when I could steal food, and lots of
Mm.
arguments about who's eating this, who's eating that, who's eating this. And I would, of course, say, wasn't me, it's kind of like, but like, like the weight thing was just going up and up and up and up, and so that's how it was, until I got a bit older when I started committing crime, like at a very
Mm.
early age, I started committing crime, getting involved with people that was just petty crime at first, but it was really that escapism from the life that it looked like I had, that the hand that it looked like I'd been dealt with. And so I was medicated, actually given a psychiatric diagnosis at like 9 or 10 years old. My mum, she took me to the psychiatric center. I remember where it was, in a clinic in the town where I lived, and they put me on medication, on antidepressants. But there was no
Mm.
real recognition, of grief or anything. I mean, it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I've even got the psychiatric reports now. I've got them here, and it's kind of like, and I've read them, perhaps when I was doing my psychotherapy training, and there's no mention of grief or loss or coping or
Mm.
any of that stuff. It's kind of like it was really just kind of I was a withdrawn, socially awkward, slow child. Apparently, it's kind of like that. That obviously needed medicating, as an attempt, an innocent attempt by a well-meaning practitioner. I don't see anyone's malicious here, but like to help me, in the only way that they knew how, and that didn't have any effect. Like crime became more of a thing, um, and while I ballooned in weight, I was put on. I even remember another thing being put on tenuate dospan. You may not remember those, but like, I don't know if they're a thing in the States, but like they were basically amphetamine. You know, it's kind of, it's one of the first diet pills that they kind of developed in the late 80s. I'm sure they were banned not long afterwards, but like, because that's all they were. They were really just amphetamine. You know, it's kind of like, so you got the, you know, and I took a lot of amphetamine in my drug taking years. So like, it's the dry mouth, the jittery feeling, the no appetite kind of thing, you know, and that's how they controlled. So that was another thing. My mum took me to a private doctor and got me put on diet pills as a way of trying to control, you know, my experience and my eating habits, but not even that would work, you know, not even that would stop me, because it was really like my only comfort. And it's just a habitual thing at that point, you know, it's just like a repetitive, habitual behavioral process on the outside that gives some ease on the inside, you know, in the process of doing, not by eating food. Like, yeah, there's some sugar in your system, for example, but like the actual hand to mouth habit, you know, and the seeking and finding habit, you know, is kind of like, is the distraction from my world, you know. That's kind of how it works. So then after that, I got into drugs. You know, I found drugs, my behavior. I was into crime already, so it was easy to commit crime, to take drugs. You know, it was easy because I knew what to do as a young teenager, 13 or 14 years old. You know, and the next 10 years were pretty much chaotic jails, institutions, psychiatric wards, and alienation from society, you know, like living in homeless hostels or people's sofas or caravans or anywhere I could, you know, I guess. Going into jail every time thinking that I would gain a lot of weight in jail because there was if I couldn't get drugs, I would eat as much food as possible, you know. It's kind of like, so, and would gain a lot of weight, and then I would come out and I would think, I'm just going to do this one more time, and I would go back into that cycle of addiction, you know. And my thing with food as well was very prominent, you know. It's like I would go out and commit crime to get drugs just to feel normal, and then I would shoplift food, you know, and constantly be feeding my face, you know, all day long. So I was quite overweight as a drug addict, which was quite surprising, because I can actually remember going into jail and sitting in what we used to call the holding tank, which is where everyone's sitting waiting to be checked into jail. And the other guys there, they used to say to me, "You're not a drug addict, you're too fat." You know, it's kind of like, because I was right. Overweight, but it's like, but I used to go out and take drugs, and I used to go out then and shoplift food, chocolate, sandwiches, all sorts of stuff, you know. And it's like, and I would just sit and eat the whole thing, you know. That was part of my ritual when I was kind of doing my thing. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it was, you know, in my until I got clean when I was 23. So I'd had 10 years of that chaos, but getting clean in 12 steps and rehabilitation, you know, and really never addressed the underlying issue. You know, it's kind of like it was left with that emptiness inside, that sort of trauma related response, that grief, that internal belief, the suppressed emotion, you know, all that stuff was there. And all I did was I stopped taking drugs, and I just turned back to food, you know. So as soon as I was in rehab, I was stealing food out of bins. I was stealing food out of kitchens. I was doing anything I could, you know. It's like each day would be a case of me watching, like even people leaving food on plates at the dinner table. I would take it, you know. I would take it all, and I would stash it in my room so I could go and I could go and binge on food when I was alone. You know, it's kind of like, that was like so I really wasn't even present in the rehabilitation process, because my mind was on later when I could eat the food that I'd stolen, you know. So yeah, I had a lot of, you know, that went on and on, that relationship with food and the gym, you know. I mean, it was extreme, you know. I mean, I had 7 cosmetic surgeries over 15 years, 2 of them in different countries, one of them in a third world country. I mean, imagine that, like for willpower. You know, we talk about willpower often, you know, willpower is not enough. You know, it's kind of like, well, like, how could this guy who managed to get himself into Asia and be put to sleep, right, to cut some parts of his body off in order to wake up thinner and hopefully happier? You know, it's kind of like, that's a lot of willpower to get that done, right? It's kind of like, but that willpower couldn't help me stop or control my eating, couldn't help me going to help me change. None of that stuff was, I was very strong-willed. I could do anything. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, but you can see why willpower, and all the crazy things that I did, just trying to change the outside. I mean, even I have so many weight loss stories. I lost 150 pounds in weight. It's kind of like at this point I was 350 pounds when I was about 25 after I'd got clean from drugs. And after I lost that weight, I remember looking in the mirror, and going, "You're still fat. You're
Mm-hmm.
still fat." I was so skinny. Like you could see all the bones in my shoulders and everything. And it's kind of like, and my mum had never, in fact, I was away from home. And my mum, when I went home, she took one look at me and she said, "You look ill. You look ill," because I was so skinny. And I was down to
Mm-hmm.
180. I've got a big frame. I was down to 180 pounds. And that's quite skinny for me. It's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
and after that, I had many, many rebounds and yo-yos, of gaining weight back and losing it again and gaining it back and losing it again. So it wasn't like I didn't have the ability or know-how. I was so into sports nutrition and all those things. And it's like I would get all these great ideas about fixing myself. Right, this is it. This time I'm going to do it. I found this new diet. I originally found the low-carb diet, I think, in 2000 or something. I remember doing it like when there was like Body Opus, and there was the bodybuilding type processes. Lyle McDonald is a name that rings a bell, and long before keto became more mainstream as it has in the last 10 years. But I did it back then and lost a load of weight. I knew it was good, and gained it all back again. Every
Right.
time. Until I
Yeah.
was really got to this point where I was willing to sort of meet myself. That's what I say to people.
Mm-hmm.
The hardest thing you'll ever do is meet yourself. It's kind of like the truth of who you are, and everything that's come with you in your past experience, all
Mm-hmm.
the things that have happened, all the beliefs that you hold about yourself in your own mind, all the reflections that you get from the surroundings that you've created in your world. It's kind of like, okay, I'm ready to go on that journey now, and see who I am.
Yeah. This is a wonderful way to start this conversation. I know we did a video short, so for those who are checking out this episode, we did a video short and we, asked a simple question. Is my food addiction just about the food? And we know low carb, keto, carnivore is very effective, but man, if people are struggling even with that dietary pattern, it's not just about the food, it's a little bit deeper. And I really think it's important that people think about why. And you said some very important things. You said, yeah, they diagnosed me with kind of depression, but they never dealt with the grief. They never dealt with the underlying reason why I may be depressed in the first place. And I think that's really important. I also think it's important that you said, you said something that struck me. You said, food was my friend. It's like, and when I think about, and that was like in the beginning and later on as you were trying to get help. So when people struggle, let's just say you're not a person who's struggling with weight and you're hearing this episode, it's deep. And if food is your friend, I mean, I don't even think about food. I think it's like, it's like putting gas in a car. But my car is not sitting out saying, "So well, I can't wait to get that gas." That's how my brain works. But imagine if your brain is different and food becomes your friend. I mean, that's just thinking about that and how that would make me struggle is mind-boggling. So I think I'm just happy you framed your thoughts in the way you did, because a lot of people who are struggling, they're beating up on themselves, and maybe nobody's ever guided them to the root cause. I'm curious though, like you have a family, they've seen you go through your struggle. I'm not sure if they've struggled with this, but what impact has your journey as you've kind of started to heal? And we'll talk about that. How has it impacted your family? Have they seen value in this journey from their perspective?
Well, my kids is kind of like where I'd look, and I think that my oldest daughter, who's 13, um, she's so wise and aware. It's kind of like for a 13-year-old, I have some mind blowing conversations with her. And I would say my healing journey is like in of recent years. The last decade is very spiritual, very reflective. very present. It's kind of like, and being in touch with myself, like a more knowing of who I am, and an accepting and loving of who I am, regardless.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, in a way, it's given me that ability to know that what's in me is in her. It's kind of like that I haven't felt the need to parent, from a very strict place, thinking I know best and she doesn't. I treat her with the same approach that I would with anyone, that the wisdom is inside of her, and I nurture her to help her to see that, to choose. And it's challenging because I'm conditioned in societal beliefs. It's kind of like we're all conditioned. We've all grown up in a society where there's common beliefs and stuff. Like, so let's say education is one. It's good to get an education. It's a common thing that we all believe. It's like that you need an education, but like just allowing her to educate herself at her pace. Without forcing her into subjects, telling her she needs to be good at it, and she's great. I mean, she gets good school reports. It's kind of like, but there have been times when I've wanted to intervene, but I just keep reminding myself that no, it's kind of like, what's important for me is that she knows who she is. It's kind of like, and the rest will develop from that. So that's how my healing journey, because I realized that my knowing of who I am is the fundamental key to the change in my life. It's kind of like, so the most important thing I can teach my kids is to know who they are. It's like, and
Yeah.
that's the beauty of it for me.
I love that. Even when like you have your podcast and I have mine, and part of what defines what that looked like was me being comfortable with who I am. I had to, what do I want to, as I'm trying to teach metabolic health to the world, what is it that I value and think is important? Some of that was colored by my life experience of getting a master's in nutrition and functional medicine and understanding everything's interconnected. And that's why I touch on topics beyond the low carb, because I feel that those topics are foundational in helping us to adopt that dietary pattern. As you experience, you can have the diet that may be helpful. And again, low fat, low carb, whatever you choose. But this pattern is very effective, but not very effective if you don't have your mind together. So I think staying in your lane, being comfortable with who you are. And I'm so happy your daughter is, you're learning from her, but she's also learning from you. And she's going to be ahead of her peers because she has, through you and her own experiences, been given kind of an understanding of life that's a little deeper than some people will ever experience. And I know you teach and help people. The Infinite Recovery Project is in the business of helping people see what you guys describe as the perfect mental health within, which is a pretty profound statement. So the perfect mental health within is something I think my audience needs to understand. So talk a little bit about what that means and why that's important.
Yeah, like I think, as you can see from my story, it's kind of like that we're all like a byproduct of our experience. So it's kind of like, this is why I do not install ideas into my daughter about any sort of psychological concepts, like I don't even ever talk about eating disorders or anything, it's kind of like, because that's installed, it's an idea. So it's kind of like, so as a child, the idea was given to me that I have an eating disorder. It's kind of like, so then it's like, okay, so there's something wrong with me and I'm afflicted with this thing that no one can really explain, but I've got it. And now I have to try and overcome it. Right. It's kind of like, so the whole thing is installed, like, and I differentiate between mental illness and mental health. What everyone else is doing out there in the world, that's mental illness. That's what they're talking about. They're trained in mental illness. They diagnose mental illness. They don't know a thing. They call it mental health, but it's nothing to do with mental health. Mental health, I was mentored by a psychiatrist for a while, and he, Dr. William Pettit, and he said that, like, he did, I can't remember the number, but he said, like, when he trained as a psychiatrist, he did 700 or 7,000 lectures on mental illness, but not one on mental health, not one, in his psychiatrist training. And that always struck me that, like, there's no real understanding of what mental health is. There's just mental illness as a taught construct. It's kind of like as a concept for behavioral struggle. It's kind of like behavior and mind-based struggles. So when I talk about perfect mental health, it's kind of like if we're born, in the eyes of perfection, via the unexplainable phenomena of birth, it's kind of like that just happens amongst us between male and female, in the human race. It's kind of like needing food and shelter and warmth. That's it. There's no software installation. There may well be some stress response to while a baby was in the womb, depending on the level of tension of the mother and so on and stuff like that. That's a proven thing, but it's like more or less there's no program installed. It's kind of like, and then from there, when we're born, the separation is created first. We're given a name. It's kind of like, and then like, depending on what we're born into, it's like whether it's ethnically diverse, whether it's a same-sex marriage or whatever it is, it's kind of like, or whatever's going on at that time. And then the culture, and then the society, and then the family beliefs, they're all installed. They become like the program. It's kind of like, so at that point, I'm a separate person. I'm Jason, you're Tony. It's kind of like we're two different people. Like the oneness, the beauty of life, it's kind of like that we're born from into disappears as we become more separate. And it looks like we have to get these things, like add these things to me, like to me, who I believe I am, to become okay. Okay, so what are those things in society? Okay, it's education, it's status, it's furthering yourself, owning businesses, money, houses, cars, all those things. And when I get all these external things, then I'll be okay on the inside, right? It's like, it's completely overlooking, like who has the most fun in life? Kids. Before the software's installed, they don't care about like their status or like getting their clothes dirty or something. That like they're just very present in the moment. And even adults you'll hear often adults saying, "Oh, I'd love to be able to play like a child," or they like to be around children because they feel the energy and the present moment fun of that. It's kind of like, so everything that we suffer with has been installed into us, is a concept, is an idea, and the perfect mental health, what I'm working with and pointing people to, is undoing everything that's not true. What is it you've been told about yourself that you're trying to fix that's not true? It's just an idea. It's just a belief-based concept. It's kind of like there's no fact in it. There's no truth. And helping people to see the perfect mental health that's already there. We undo what's been done, and we see what was always there. The part of you that cannot be damaged, that you were born with. It's like that's always there. There's always, sometimes I call it like the pilot light, in the boiler, that like sometimes the flames are not running, but the pilot light is always there. It's kind of like, and it's just finding that little spark, that little sort of knowing, it's like, I mean, everyone that's listening to this podcast, no matter how much suffering they've been through, has got 100% track record of overcoming all adversity up until this moment right now. 100%. It's kind of like, and I love the saying that I've had many problems in my life, 99% of which never happened. Because like most of our suffering is centered in our thinking, is centered in our mind, not in factual and actual material reality, things that happen outside of us. So it's really about seeing that relationship between who we are and the outside world and what we've made up, what we've believed. It's kind of undoing all that stuff, because no one finds satisfaction and happiness in weight loss, in body shapes, or in money or status or business. That's not true contentment. True contentment is sitting in the morning looking out the window, like or watching your kids play, or helping an old person across the road or something. It's kind of like things that have got absolutely no financial reward or that make you feel good inside. That's the place of contentment that everyone is everyone is searching for, in things. They're just innocently searching in things. This is where all the conditioning and all the mess. So
Yeah.
I like to take all that away and get rid of those ideas and help people see, like happiness and contentment is an inside job. It's inside of you now. It's not
Mm.
inside of you later. It's not inside of you when you fix your eating disorder or when you lose weight or when you get enough money or when you stop your addiction. It's there, it's always been there.
And it's interesting as you talk about this, and it's such a broad concept in that if I'm a person who's trying to advance in my company, I got to get outside of my head. I could see how you can overwhelm yourself with how you perceive yourself. I'm not good enough, and all of these other things that come to your head. I could imagine as a parent, you get inside your head and you're thinking about things a certain way. And I'm never going to be the parent that I always dream, because your brain is telling you the opposite. And I really can imagine, since I deal with a lot of people with weight issues, that their perception of their body. You gave the example of how you had lost. I've heard this story so many times. People lose weight and they still walk on a plane and think they can't fit in the seat, or they, you know what I mean? They just still in their head think that they're still this large person, even though they have physically changed to the degree where your parents are saying you look sick, you know? So if, and I guess when I'm asking about, as I think about patients who are larger and they have this body image issue, rather they're at the weight that they're trying to lose, or they're already lost weight. What's up? See, this body image issue is something that it seems would be very beneficial to understand the brain, and professionals who are in this space, who are trying to help people, have to help people with how they think about themselves. So talk a little bit about, you know, what this model can do for a person who has body image issues.
Yeah. Like as you remember from my story, my body image issues were horrific. It's kind of like I hated myself. I looked at myself in a
Mm-hmm.
reflection in a shop window and it was like, and I hated it, and I used to wake up in the morning and I'd really fantasize about cutting parts of myself off. It's kind of like I hated the body how it was. And I had so many surgeries and invested money and flew around the world trying to make myself thin because I thought that was what the problem was and how it would make me happy, So I had a lifetime of
Mm-hmm.
that distorted perception of myself, on the outside. That's one thing that, is worth considering. It is a distorted perception, and become fixated on what we think is the problem. It's kind of like, and the problem is the thinking, it's not the weight, it's kind of like, because it's, it's true. Everyone will know, it's kind of like that. Not everyone has a certain shape of body will feel the same way about it, So
Mm-hmm.
it's and it's kind of like, and actually, I mean, these are ways that you can point people to it. If somebody's feeling down when they're talking to you about their body shape, and you say, well, are you down consistently 24/7? And they'll go, well, no, I have my happy moments. It's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not all the time. So what happens in those happy moments? Because like your body shape is still the same. It's kind of like, okay, so that straight away tells me that if it was really about my body shape, my unhappiness or my discontentment, then it would be permanent 24/7, right? And
Mm-hmm.
everyone will have moments of clarity when they're not thinking about their body, feeling happy, but they're still in the same body. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
that straight
That's right.
away creates something that we can say, well, hold on a minute then. Okay. So if I've constantly got the same body, but some of the time I feel happy, it can't necessarily be a fixed thing. It has to be about my relationship in my own mind with my outside, the external of my body, what I believe it means about me and what I believe other people think about me because I have this body. And also where I believe happiness lies, that if I didn't have this body, right? So all those things are creating a gap, right? Here's me, who I think I am, and what I think I look like, and what I think other people think of me. And over there in my thinking mind, is this me without this body that I think if I can get to there, I'll be happy, right? So I've created this
Mm-hmm.
illusionary gap. right? And it's kind of like, and I spend my whole time and effort thinking and striving, like using behavioral change as a way of doing it to close the gap. You know, if I could just get thin,
Mm-hmm.
if I could just get fit, if I could just lose this weight, if I could just get into smaller clothes, then I'd have a relationship. Then I'd be happy. Then my kids, I'd be more healthy for my
Mm-hmm.
kids. All these things, right? But it's like happiness can't come from weight loss. It can't come from changing the outside of you. You know, it's kind of like, sure, I'm not saying you won't feel better if you lose weight, because of sure you
Sure.
will. You know, it's kind of like, but what I'm saying is that will not be, that's more of a plaster on a bullet hole. You know, losing weight to feel happy, you're going to feel happy for a moment, but if you've not done any internal work or understanding, you'll just simply move on to the next thing that you think is going to make you happy, and the
That's
next thing and
right.
the next
That's
thing and the
right.
next thing, you know.
Wow. And it's so important. I think about, even for me personally, there are days when I feel like I'm the best physician on the planet, and then other days when I feel like I'm failing. There are days when I feel like, as a leader, I'm the best. They should elevate me to the CEO, and then other days I don't even I shouldn't even have a title, right?
Yeah.
I feel that way as a husband. I feel that way as a father. I even feel that way sometimes as a podcaster, and
Mm.
so. I just think that, man, if we can get that right, and again, it's probably okay to have moments when you pause and you question. It's probably okay to a certain extent, but man, when it becomes like almost like a sickness, and you just lose all of that confidence that you had just, the day before, because of somebody's comments, or something happened in your environment, your life experience, questions that. And it's just really interesting. And I think, again, it could be expanded beyond just the topic of addiction. Now,
Yeah.
I just want to pause for a second. You've kind of shared your journey, and if you were to, I remember, I think it was A Beautiful Mind. I think that movie. But I remember when some movies do a really good job of helping you to see the world through the lens of others, right? So I think in that movie, what is schizophrenia? And you kind of didn't even realize they were putting you in the brain of that person, and you saw the world through their lens. So just for a moment, could you just give us a sense of what it's like to be a person with an addiction? So if I don't, I think we all have addictive tendencies, especially with
Mm.
sugar. I mean, who doesn't like, sweet things? But
Yeah.
from your perspective, if you could just put your cap on and say, this is what it's like to be me when I'm going through these addictions.
Yeah. I mean, like, the if I'm thinking about drug addiction, it would be slightly different to food, you know. But it would be like, you know, from a drug addiction point of view, it would be like, before my eyes had opened, as my mind started to come online, you know, my first thought would be, have I got any drugs? You know, it's kind of like
Mm,
that was it, you know. And it's kind of like, and I might be in somewhat of a dazed state, so I'd be kind of like half remembering, you know, and at that point I'd be opening my eyes, looking around to see if there's any drugs or paraphernalia, checking the drawer, then realizing either I smoked it all, or I took it all last night, or I've got some, in which case I'd be like made up. The day would be great. You know, it's kind of like, if I didn't have any, then it would be a question of, like, I would get dressed so quickly, not wash, not shower, probably put the same clothes on that I'd had for months. You know, it's kind of like thinking that I was looking completely invisible and inconspicuous. And like, then this is just one random day, many versions of this, you know. But if in the desperate stages, it would be a case of going to a supermarket to steal something that was easily to
mm,
sell. So, like, what would people buy? Like cheese, bacon, razor blades, batteries. You know, it's kind of like things that everyone would want. You know, that you could get money for quickly.
hmm
You know, maybe I'd go through this. Have I got any money? Where could I get some? Is there someone I could borrow some from first? You know, it's kind of like, you know, all these things would come through my mind. So it would be, and I would need to commit the crime or get the money just to feel normal, because at this point my body would start, you know, like feeling unwell, physically unwell, you know, like a
hmm
withdrawal. So it could be restless, achy legs, watering eyes, feeling like I've got a cold, you know, starting to shiver and shake a little bit, you know, and stuff like that. I'm feeling just cold and unwell. And you know, so I'd be going through finding a way to get money. That was one of the ways, was committing crime, stealing it. It could be, you know, if I got involved in bigger crimes, stealing cars, different things, throughout time. And I borrowed you call it borrowed. I never paid it back. I asked to borrow from my family where I could, and so on and stuff like that and I would go through that whole process, until I got the money. It's kind of like enough to buy drugs. And from there, it would be, who can I go to get the drugs? It's kind of like, who's got
Mm-hmm.
some. Sometimes it would be a case of there isn't any, it's kind of like you'd have to look around a lot. Sometimes you just go to the usual place and get some and then go back and take drugs and then do the same again. It's kind of like, maybe it got later in the day where I would kind of sleep for a few hours and then it'd be the next day, but that was it really. And any opportunist things that came along in the time, it's kind of like any, if you saw something of the financial value that had been left unattended, it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like, you just take it. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
that. It was really that way, and it was just about feeling normal, like at first, and then finding oblivion after that. It's kind of like, if there ever was an opportunity to buy a lot of drugs, let's say I committed a crime that brought me a bit of money and I could buy a lot of drugs, more than I usually would. Yeah, I would always have a good idea in my mind, oh, this will last me a few days. It's kind of like, then I'll feel okay, but it would never last more than a day because it would just all be gone. I could never control that use of drugs. And it was always a lot of thinking about myself as well in that, a lot of self-loathing, a lot of self-hatred, a lot of wondering why I couldn't change. Why am I in this situation? Is my life ever going to be different? Why does nobody like me? My own family had alienated me at that point. It's like when things were pretty desperate. So yeah, it was some version of that, on a daily basis, for in active drug addiction for sure. You know.
That's a mouthful, Jason. I mean, this is I wasn't sure what you would say, and I wasn't sure how I would react, but it is 100% true that that's not something I've never experienced. I've never felt that way. I never woke up and the first thing I thought about was a substance, and again, it could be food as well. So
Yeah.
but I think it's important. And the reason why I asked that question is that, I think in order to understand behavior, it's important to see the world through the lens of those who have a certain behavior. And so the next time I see somebody on the news who does something that I don't consider, ethical or whatever, I may pause and say, well, why? What was the driving force behind that behavior? If it's somebody I know, it could be a patient or a friend or family member. If they do something that I don't expect them to do, I'll understand why. And what's cool about that is that you're still going to make people accountable for their actions, but is there a path? I remember watching in the United States, kind of a discussion between I think it was kind of our current president Biden and Bernie Sanders. It wasn't a discussion, but it was like how they handled a certain situation. And and Biden, he commented that, I don't talk about politics too much on my podcast, but he talked about if somebody did some harm to his mom, or maybe they stole something, just lock them up. He had that kind of approach. They need to be accountable for their behavior, which there's some truth to that as well. But
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders was like, of course you're going to lock them up, but then let's figure out what we can do to kind of rehab them and understand why they did it, or what was the. And I think you're never really giving people a pass when you do that, but it's so helpful to at least say, is there a way that this person can be kind of rehab back into society? And it starts, I think the first step is to understand why. And if I understand how strong these addictions are, and what they do to us, that may help me at least say, is there a way for society to help them heal? Now, having said that, it seems, because I just shared with you that I have never felt that way. Some people struggle with addictions and others don't. So why do you think that's true? Why do you think some people are more prone to addictive behaviors when others aren't?
Yeah, I think everyone's got I think what we're probably classifying is more the level of like the socially acceptable addiction versus like the non-socially acceptable addiction, which becomes apparent. You know, it's kind of like
Hmm.
if you take mobile phones, which I often refer to as a soother for adults. You know, it's kind of like if you take mobile phones and you take screen time and you take finances and debt and other things. You know, you'd say that everyone has some sort of addiction. You know, it's kind of like it's just really it's a coping mechanism. It is an
Hmm.
innocent coping mechanism. You know, it's for us. It's a habitual process that we repeat. You know, it's kind of like as a way of coping with something. Now, some of them, the body and mind does not know the difference between socially acceptable alcohol and street bought heroin. You know, it's kind of like it's just a substance, you know, and a habitual
Hmm.
process. It doesn't go, oh, no, I don't like this heroin. You bought it on the streets. I prefer the medical type. It's like it's the body doesn't do that. You know, it's kind of like it just wants a way to escape, a way of coping. You know, and whatever way, you know, whether you're connected to people who know about street drugs, whether you're inclined or you feel right to try it, or whether you're simply spending 12 hours a day on your mobile phone, escaping your partner because you feel uncomfortable in your relationship, or
Mm.
you hate your body, you know, it's kind of like, and you're trying to get attention on social media, whatever it is you're doing, you know, it's kind of like there's a there's a beautiful experience of being alive available. You know, it's kind of like where everything's okay. You know, it's kind of like, and
Hmm.
by everything's okay, I don't mean that like all experience doesn't happen. I don't mean that we don't have the trials and tribulations of being human. I mean that we can come from a different place. We can see it in a
Hmm.
different way. We can change our perspective because life is an inside out experience. It's not an outside in experience. You know, it's like life is happening inside of us. You know, it's like between Viktor Frankl said, you know, between something along the lines of between what happens and us feeling something, there's a space, you know, and that is perception. You know, it's like so every single thing, every single person, everything, 100% of the time, there's perception, you know, and it's kind of
Hmm.
like that means that we are able to live in a more joyful, more happy, more contented state, regardless of what is happening outside of us, no matter what, you know. And it's like that's the place to look because that's a universal truth, you know. It's true for everyone, you know. That's just the way that it works, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, this phone that's in my hands. Uh, hey, if anybody watching or listening um, has a cell phone, they have to know that that sucker, it will definitely, it's an addictive tool. And I literally have had moments even when I'm talking to my wife where she's had to pause and say, "Hey, can you put your phone down for a minute?" And I'm talking to her while I'm doing this, and it's
Mm,
like, or even I had to remove some of the alerts because when you share YouTube videos and other things you're interested in engaging, and I had to put the alerts off because, and
yeah,
it's like a drug, and it's like, those little pings,
yeah.
it's like dopamine. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we all have some of that, and we definitely need to do a better job. It's pervasive, and let's not talk about the fact that in our work environment, our teams are less efficient because they are on their phones while they're in their work environment. I mean, that could be a whole podcast just to talk about how society somehow society has decided that that's okay. Like, it's okay to have the phone on while you're working. And I think that's a big flaw, and I think we need to go back a little bit and go back to the old model where people can still reach you if there's an emergency, but we don't have to have Facebook on while we're at work. So
Yeah.
now it's clear that people need help in this area. There's probably things we can do different. Any thoughts on how we could do better in terms of how we help people who have addictive behaviors?
I think like the world of addiction treatment is changing. You know, there's more than the old traditional only one way of helping people, which was the 12-step model, kind of like across a lot of treatment centers. You know, there's more holistic, there's more psycho-spiritual and spiritual approaches coming through to addiction treatment that are, you know, particularly with the way of data and the world the way it is at the moment. You know, it's kind of like, but it's just very difficult, I find, to like so many people trained in the medical and sort of somewhat scientifically backed model. You know, it's kind of like where there's a lot of data and experience from the past are reluctant to open their minds to new approaches. You know, I found a lot of resistance, you know, to trying to suggest to a psychiatrist that everyone has perfect mental health, for example, you know, is kind of like straight away they become their identity, you know, the idea of themselves that they've created, which is including a title and a history and a money invested into education and so on, becomes threatened, you know. So it's like, so there's resistance to pointing people to the fact that, you know, of seeing what's good with them rather than seeing what's wrong with them, you know. And there's money involved in illness and medication, you know. It's kind of we all
Mm-hmm.
know about big pharma, we all know about kind of how much power there is in that. So really it's like, how do you change the world? You know, well, you start off by making your bed, you know. It's kind of like, and then you take one step at a time and you help people one person at a time the best you can. You know, it's kind of like, and should the opportunity come to speak to many like this, you know, it's kind of like, then take it and do what you can, you know, helping the world wake up to see, you know, a more beautiful experience of being alive.
Yeah, I like that. And I think uh, the healing starts at home, which is why I'm happy you've had your experiences. I definitely share the things I'm learning with my boys. So I know, and it's clear from how you describe your daughter and the relationship you have. You love your daughter. I love my two sons, and but there are people who will hear this episode who have, you know, their parents, they have kids, they're concerned they may be at risk for addictive behavior or even mental health challenges like depression.
Yeah.
Um, you know, what's your thoughts on how to help a teen who, you know, or a parent of a teen so
Yeah.
that they can reduce the risk that their kids may have issues around this topic?
Yeah, it's often not and I don't have the answer that people want to hear. You know, it's kind of like, it's like quite often people come to me about their teenagers. You know, it seemed to be that that's just one of the things that I get. You know, and it's like one of the questions that I have to ask quite often is because the parent will come and they'll say, "Well, my teen or my child is doing this, this, and this," you know, and it's like, and I'm worried about them. You know, can you help them? You know, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll go, well, yeah, I can. I said, but I've got one important question. I said, do they want help or do you want help
Mm,
do you want help for them? You know, and it's kind of like, it's always, well, I'd say 98% of the time, it's always, they don't want help. You know, it's kind of, it's because I can't help somebody who doesn't want help. You know, it's kind of like,
right.
and, but I would if they wanted it, you know, it's kind of like, but it's always that. So I often say to the parent, well, can I work with you to help you to connect more with your child?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because that is the
Mm-hmm.
missing part of the puzzle. You know, it's kind of like there's a gap between how much the child often feels they can share with a parent and the relationship breakdown. And this is all based on the stuff that we talked about earlier, the conditioning, the
Mm-hmm.
ideas, the beliefs, the so on, the it'll be the upbringing of the parent. You know, maybe the parent has been through some trauma, some tragedy, or so on, and something like that. And then it's generationally passed down throughout the
Mm-hmm.
things. And what happens is kids that are growing up now in a different generation, the gap has opened up. You know, the gap between parent and child. You know, it's kind of where been a communication breakdown, and there's a real. And I always ask, you know, I say, how well do you feel like you know your child? You know, and it's like, once we get past the initial, yeah, I know them, you know, it's kind of like, well, I don't really know that much about what they do and who they're with and kind of like how they feel, you know, the important things. So how close are you? Is there affection between you? You know, is there real feelings of closeness and safety? Do you feel like they trust you? It's kind of like those things have
Mm-hmm.
kind of broken down somewhere along the way. So it's really about the healing is in the mending of the relationship and the reconnection. You know, it's kind of, and it may not have an immediate like, because the actual response parents want is, yeah, I can stop your child from doing something addictively that's dangerous pretty quickly. You know, it's like that's what they want to hear because that's what they're fearful about. But really healing the relationship. It's a lifetime of value. It's gonna be stuff that you learn that's going to be useful for the rest of your life in that relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
so on. So I'm looking at that, the deep inner connection. That's always possible. And often a child is longing for something. They're longing for the
Mm-hmm.
presence of a parent that's unable to be present, or like you said, when you're on your phone. It made me laugh when you said about being on your phone and your wife saying, "Hey, can you put that down?" It's kind of like my girlfriend does that too. It's kind of like the same thing. And it's like, and we do that with our kids. It's kind of like my kids will
Mm-hmm.
be going, "Dad, dad, 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 dad," and I go, "Yeah, in a
Right.
minute, in a minute, in a minute." It's kind of, I'm just reading, just writing, just doing something. Well, what happens for them children is, because they're so resilient and so capable, is they go off and they cope with that themselves. It's kind of like,
Mm.
but eventually they make that mean something about them. Like, my dad is never there. It's kind of like,
Mm.
and that's one of the things that people escape from. Like, I really
Yeah.
long for the love of my parents, but it feels like they're never there when I ask them.
Wow. And that's funny because even as I hear you say that, like, uh, I have two kids who are older, one in grad school and one who's done, who's trying to start his business. And it's like, I'm so busy, but I literally made a commitment this week to say, okay, let's carve out some specific time, put them on the calendar and say, this is the time we talk about school or your business. And I think, and you're right. They need us because they trust us. We're not getting anything out of it other than love and trying to help them. And I think we all need to pause, no matter who you are, no matter what you've achieved, no matter how good of a parent you are. It's important that we pause and make sure we're giving them the time they deserve. Put the phone down, put them on the calendar if necessary. And
Yeah,
it's okay to do that. Another thing we want to do is make sure our kids are happy. And I'm really a big fan of just being happy. I don't need you to make a $500,000 a year. Just be happy. And I know that people who struggle with mental health challenges are gonna potentially be in a dark place. What's the connection between mental health and happiness? Could you kind of talk a little bit about that?
yeah. I mean, like, mental illness, it's kind of like, is a byproduct of our, when we've become disconnected from ourselves and somehow got lost in some habitual process. It's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
that's then been diagnosed or conceptualized by somebody, some profession. It's like, so, and mental health is what's within us. It's what's within the soul of all human beings. And happiness and contentment, as I see it, you know it's like the fake happiness that we talk about in society. It's kind of like the temporary, weak happiness, that has no longevity. Is like the happiness for getting a new car, or the happiness for losing some weight and so on and stuff like that. It's kind of like that, those things are like temporary happiness. True happiness, and everyone will reconcile this. It's kind of like that, you can have moments of true happiness, but you don't really recognize it as that. It's kind of like, it might be, you get up and look out the window in the morning with no worries, and you think, oh, my life's amazing. Or you watching walking in the park, walking your dog, or watching some kids playing or kicking a ball, and it's kind of like, not for anything. It's like, and there's this place inside of you that just feels some joy and contentment. It's kind of like, so
Mm-hmm.
happiness, joy, and contentment is our, what I call our default state. It's when we undo all the shit that's been installed into us, all the ideas that's been given to us, all the concepts that we need to fit into, all the roles that we need to fulfill to be okay. As a man, the
Mm-hmm.
masculinity, the provider, the alpha. It's like, as a
Mm-hmm.
business owner, the leader, and all that stuff, all those roles. Like, when you just take it all off, take off your suit of armor, just take all these ideas off that you've been given to be in the world, and just kind of be with what is. It's like, and contentment and happiness is right there for you. You don't need anything to get it. You don't need to
Mm-hmm.
achieve or get any status. Not saying you won't want to achieve, and you won't. I separate doing in the world and being. It's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
your happiness is a state of being. It's who you are. It's when you
Mm.
reconnect to your true nature.
I like that. I really like that because there are so many things that people are struggling with. It could be maybe a person is in the LGBTQ community, right? And society is saying, no, we can't, you can't do that.
Mm,
Maybe they learned that from their church or something, right?
yeah.
But just being comfortable with who you are is so important. Rather, it's the person who's in that community or somebody who is struggling with their weight or whatever it is, or just your identity as a person of color versus a person, all of these factors need to be looked at from the lens through the lens of let's be comfortable with who I am. And I think that's a, a great, easy way to be happy. Um, I think that's really critical. And so let's see, so a lot of the things you shared was insightful for me. I assume it was insightful for the audience who are going to see or hear us. Let's hope so.
Yeah.
But you also have a wonderful podcast yourself. I had a chance to check it out, Misunderstandings of the Mind. And a lot of people are going to want to hear more from you. And I know you have guests that provide perspective as well, but you throw in your flavor.
Yeah.
And I just want to hear from you. You know, what can people expect when they check out your podcast, and maybe even circle back to what people can expect if they are involved in the Infinite Recovery Project. So, talk a little bit about those two things.
Yeah. The Infinite Recovery Project is an alternative treatment to addiction. It's online process. It's kind of like where you go through um, you go through a process, really. It's kind of like of learning who you are. It's like undoing rather than doing. Like I've been talking about, really, is to see the part of you that's untouched, undamaged, that's always been there, and help you lift off the imaginary heavy rucksack that you carry around, that you then want
Mm-hmm.
to medicate and escape from. That's kind of what that's about. So it's really about, I call it explorations in true nature, like seeing what's true about you, seeing what's good about you, seeing what's right with you, not seeing what's wrong with you. And, people tend to wake up to more joy and contentment and happiness pretty quickly in that process. And the podcast is really, in a way, supporting that, because the podcast is really my life story. It's kind of like all those episodes on there, they're all something that I've struggled with, at times. And I always
Mm-hmm.
wanted help. Let's say I was struggling with anxiety, I was having repetitive anxiety. I'd go and search for, how do I get help with anxiety? So all the podcasts have a different in point. They might be about anxiety, about relationships, about connection, about mental health, about grief, loss, trauma, sadness, all those things, addiction. It's like, but really, they're all pointing back to the fundamental thing that I talked about earlier, which is the mind's perception, the inside out experience of life versus the outside in. Because almost, I can guarantee you this, almost, I would say, go as far as say everyone who's suffering believes that life is happening outside of them and they need to do something in their life to be okay on the inside. And I could
Mm-hmm.
almost be sure and say every person that's truly content knows that that's not true. It's not happening that way, because life is happening inside of me, not outside of me. My whole life, the only
Mm-hmm.
thing that I experience is happening inside of me. Okay, I have a perception of things that do happen in the material world. But like,
Mm-hmm.
so every podcast conversation points people back from a different starting point back to that place that's inside of them that's okay. It's like where you can experience
Mm-hmm.
peace, contentment, and joy now, regardless of what's happening on the outside. It's like, and that is a beautiful experience for anyone suffering, or especially anyone like me who had been through every different attempt of different modality, different process, different treatment, different ways of finding happiness, and had never really found it. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's really a much more light-hearted, much more joyful, simple way of pointing people to what back inside.
I love that, and as you shared those thoughts, all I could hear in my brain is authenticity. Like if my wife does acting, and when she's acting, in fact, she can actually do a little bit of a accent similar to yours. It's really cute to see. I
Cool.
told her one day we do animated videos. We started. I said one day we have to do a video where we do that as well. She can do Jamaican accents, etc. But man, but let's just say she's being herself, right? Being authentic then makes it easier to be comfortable with who you are. You just got to be who you are, like 99% of the time, hopefully, if not 100. And then everything gets easier. You can be happy with yourself because you're not, in a play. You're not, faking it through life. So I really love what you've expressed. And I just think it resonates with me. So thankfully you have those resources out there. And it's almost like you're cheating because you have decided these are things that are important in my life through your podcast. Let me just get an expert to come and talk about it so I can get my therapy for free.
You know what? It was true. It's like that podcast. I mean, I probably started about 4 years ago, and it's been less
Yeah.
over the last year or so because I've been so busy. But like
Yeah.
every one of those people were people that I chose, and every one of them had something to say that I wanted to know about. And I would
That's
go as
right.
far as to say that every conversation helped me in some way to see something about myself.
And that's what this has done for myself and my listeners, and that's why I love. I've learned a lot by being a podcaster, and I'm so thankful that I can cover a lot of different topics with my guests. So let's wrap up with my protecting your nest question, which is, as you think about aspects of my nest and rope, as a reminder, nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, how we think, recovering from trauma, relationships, organisms, and pollutants that harm us, and your emotions and life experiences. When you think about those elements that are foundational in helping us to achieve
Yeah.
metabolic health, where do you plan to put the most attention over the next year?
Yeah, it's really like the trauma and how we think thing. It's kind of like is one seeing. It's always seeing how that traumatized self, what I call, like that deficient self, kind of like it's almost like the little boy in me kind of wants to show up in the world and take over, because he's frightened or he needs something. It's kind of like, so I'm always looking there because that's the only cause of suffering. It's kind of like when that's happening. And relationships, it's kind of like it's what we said earlier, like slowing down, and valuing, like what we've got versus, trying to go out and find something new or kind of missing the beauty that's already there in front of us. It's kind of like and keep on seeking something in the outside world, business, money, finances, further success, more creation in the world. It's kind of like, but there's already some beautiful people around us, no doubt. It's kind of like and nurturing that, and being more present in that, like we talked about with the phone thing. It's kind of like just putting the phone down and being with the children. It's kind of like that's just makes your life, because life, the thing is that life is happening now, right? It's today. It's not happening next week or next year when I get
That's
somewhere,
right.
when I get something. So all these days and moments strung together are my life. It's kind of like, so make the most of them.
I love it. Well, let me tell you, Jason, you've exceeded my expectations. Not that I didn't expect you to have a great conversation with me, but I
Yeah.
just think that my audience will be blessed and enriched with this conversation. So I really appreciate you. Now, clearly, you have a podcast and you have your other resources. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
And you can get me through any of those resources. Just email there's an email on the podcast, and there's an email on the Infinite Recovery Project, or my coaching website is wideworldcoaching.com. You can find me, or just put my name in Google. There's quite a lot of stuff out there and things, it's
That's
kind of
right.
like, so yeah. And I'm always open to having a conversation with anyone who's struggling, who's curious about what we've talked about.
All right. Well, sounds like a plan. My wife would be happy. We both have similar gray stuff on our chins. So,
Yeah.
and I appreciate you, man. So thank you so
Okay.
much. And I'll wrap up with a couple of thoughts. And what I want to say is that James has shared, how he has personally overcome the many struggles he faced, or actually continuing to overcome the struggles that he faces in life. And I think it's important we say that because this is a lifelong journey, and there are many ways to heal or overcome struggle. My goal is to make sure you have as many tools as possible in your toolkit so that you can do exactly what James is doing. And with these tools, you will not only greatly increase your chances of not being defined by your struggles, but instead are better because you struggle. So when struggle finds its way into your life, give yourself the grace to initially be a little disappointed, which is normal, but then having the courage to flip it. And you do this by asking yourself a simple question: how will the struggle I am facing help me to be the person I've always wanted to be? And with this reframing, you accept that you will face struggles in your life, but when you face them, you will use them to improve your life. So I really hope this episode added value to your life. I appreciate you for coming to my channel and to my podcast. And until we do it again, let's continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect our nest. You've been listening to Protecting Your Nest with Dr. Tony Hampton. For more, visit drtonyhampton.com.